What if everything you thought was bad luck was actually the universe doing you the biggest favor of your life, and the only reason you couldn't see it in that moment was because you were standing so close to the wreckage that you couldn't possibly see the full picture of what was being built for you on the other side of it? When you build your identity around something external, whether that's a career, a relationship, or even just an idea of who you're supposed to become, you are not actually finding yourself. You are borrowing a self, and like anything that's borrowed, at some point it has to be returned. And the universe is the one that decides when the return window closes, not you. And the reason this matters in the context of luck and timing is because when that thing gets taken away or falls apart or simply stops working, we immediately call it bad luck. We immediately call it terrible timing. We say things like, why is this happening to me? Why now? I was so close. And what we don't see in that moment is that the universe didn't take it away to punish you. It took it away because it was never actually yours to begin with. And you had confused the vehicle for the destination. Think about it this way: if the thing you committed to for all of those years was truly meant for you, truly yours with who you actually are at your core, then no amount of bad timing, no series of unfortunate circumstances would have been able to remove it from your life permanently, because the things that are truly yours have a way of finding you again even when you lose them. And the things that were never yours have a way of leaving no matter how tightly you hold on. And the moment I really understood that, not just intellectually but in my body, in my gut, in that deep quiet place where you know things before you can explain them, was the moment I stopped calling it bad luck and started calling it information. But there is this idea that the universe or life, or whatever you want to call the force that moves things around, operates on a timeline that is almost never the same as the timeline we have in our heads. And the gap between those two timelines is what we call bad luck. When you don't get the thing when you wanted it, when the door closes right when you were about to walk through it, when the plan you spent months or years building suddenly stops being available to you, your brain registers that as failure, as loss, as evidence that something has gone wrong. And your brain is not entirely wrong about the loss part, something is ending, but it is completely wrong about the failure part, because what is actually happening in those moments is that you are being redirected, and redirection always feels like rejection when you're in the middle of it. I think about all the people who have ever told me about a moment in their life where things went wrong, and then I think about what came after. And almost every single time, what came after was better or more aligned than what they were trying to hold on to. And they could see that clearly in hindsight, but they couldn't see it at all in the moment, because in the moment, all you can feel is what you're losing, not what you're being cleared for. And here's the part that I think is genuinely worth sitting with, because I spent a lot of time on this. The things that are being cleared away from your life are not being taken away at random. They are being taken away because they were filling space that something else needs, and that something else cannot arrive until the space is actually empty. And the universe will keep the space full of the wrong thing for as long as you keep insisting that the wrong thing is the right thing. It will only empty out when you are finally ready, even if that readiness is forced on you by circumstances rather than chosen by you voluntarily. What felt like the worst luck of my life was actually the universe clearing space for something that could not have existed alongside the thing I was holding on to. And I could not have understood that while I was still inside the grief of losing it. I think it is one of the most underrated and underappreciated parts of going through a period where everything falls apart. And it's this: you find out who you actually are, not who you were performing being, not who you were trying to become to fit a certain path or fill a certain role or meet certain expectations, but who you actually are when all of the structures that were holding the performance in place are suddenly gone, and you are left with just yourself, stripped down, uncertain, groundless, and somehow still standing. And what I found when I went through that, when the thing I had committed to for so long was gone, and I didn't know who I was without it, was that the person who was left was actually more interesting than the person I had been pretending to be. And I say pretending not because I was being fake or dishonest, but because I was living inside a version of myself that had been defined by something external. And when the external thing disappeared, I discovered that there was something underneath it, something quieter, something more honest, something that had been sitting patiently underneath all that commitment and identity building and forward motion, just waiting for enough space to breathe. And that person, the one who emerged after the loss, after the disorientation, after the period where I genuinely didn't know who I was or what I was doing or where I was headed, that person turned out to be closer to my actual self than any version I had been while I was so busy being committed to something that was never really mine. And what I want you to understand is that this is not an accident, and it is not luck, and it is not a coincidence that losing the thing that defined you leads you to find the thing that is actually you, because that is exactly how it is supposed to work. That is the mechanism, that is the process. And the reason it feels so terrible while it's happening is because you are not losing something small. You are losing a version of yourself. And even when that version was limiting you, even when it was borrowed and not owned, it was still familiar. And the loss of familiarity is one of the most disorienting experiences a human being can go through. I want to introduce something here that I've been building towards since the beginning of this video, and it's this concept of invisible threads. And I don't mean this in a mystical or abstract way. I mean it in a very practical tangible, observable, look at your own life kind of way. When you look back at the moments in your life where things went wrong, where timing felt cruel, where luck seemed to have disappeared, and you trace what happened after those moments, there is almost always a thread, a line you can draw from the moment of loss to the moment of finding, from the closed door to the open one, from the thing that ended to the thing that began. And when you can see the whole thread from beginning to end, it is almost never random. It is almost never just bad luck followed by good luck. It is almost always one thing making room for another, one version of your life dissolving so that a different version could form. But here's the critical thing about those invisible threads. You can almost never see them while you are living through the part where things are falling apart. You can only see them from the other side, which means that while you are in the middle of what feels like the worst timing possible, you are actually in the middle of a thread that you won't be able to see in full until you have walked further down it. And that requires something that is genuinely difficult, which is trusting the thread even when you can't see where it's going. And I'm not asking you to be blindly optimistic. I'm not asking you to pretend that the loss doesn't hurt, or that the timing isn't painful, or that the luck doesn't feel impossibly unfair in the moment, because all of those things are real and they deserve to be felt fully and honestly without being immediately repackaged as blessings. I'm just asking you to hold the possibility, even at the edges of the darkest moments, that what looks like the thread breaking might actually be the thread turning. I want to be genuinely honest with you here because I think you deserve the real version of this and not the cleaned up highlight reel version. And the real version is that there were moments during the period I'm describing where I was not okay, where I was not handling it gracefully, where I was not quietly trusting the process and believing in the thread. I was just lost and I was scared. And I was grieving something that I had built a significant part of my identity around. And grief doesn't care about your philosophy or your understanding of timing. It just shows up and sits in your chest like something heavy and immovable and demands to be felt regardless of whether you have the time or the emotional bandwidth for it. And one of the things I had to learn during that period, one of the things I genuinely could not have learned any other way, was that there is a difference between the life you were performing and the life you were actually meant to be living. And sometimes the only way that difference becomes visible is when the performance is forcibly stopped, when the stage collapses and you're standing in the rubble of everything you were trying to build, and you realize that some part of you is actually relieved. Not about the loss, not about the pain, but about the fact that you no longer have to hold up something that was always a little too heavy for you. Something that never quite fit the way you told yourself it did. Something that you were so committed to that you stopped asking whether you actually wanted it or whether you just wanted to be the kind of person who didn't give up on things. Because sometimes the hardest thing to admit to yourself is not that you failed at something, but that you were succeeding at the wrong thing. And that the commitment you were so proud of was actually keeping you loyal to a version of your life that was never going to make you whole. And it took losing it entirely for me to finally be honest about that. So here's what I actually want you to do with all of this. And I mean actually do it, not just watch this video and feel something for a few minutes and then scroll on to the next thing. Because I think if this is landing for you, it means there is something in your life that this applies to. And I want you to give that thing some genuine attention today. I want you to think about something in your life right now that feels like bad timing or bad luck. Something that didn't work out the way you planned. Something that ended when you weren't ready for it to end, or something that hasn't arrived yet when you feel like it should have. And I want you to sit with this question honestly. What if the timing isn't wrong? What if the timing is actually protecting you from something you can't see yet? And what would it feel like to trust that even just a little, even just enough to stop fighting the redirection and start getting curious about where it might be taking you? And I also want you to think about this. What version of yourself has been quietly waiting underneath whatever identity or commitment or plan you've been holding onto so tightly? What part of you has been patient and still and waiting for enough space to actually exist? Because I think for a lot of people that version is much closer to their real self than the version they've been performing. And I think losing the thing that was on top of it is sometimes the only way to find it. Drop it in the comments, seriously, because I am genuinely curious, and I also think there is something powerful about saying these things out loud, even in a comment section, even to strangers. Because naming the thing you're going through is the first step to understanding what it's doing for you, rather than just what it's doing to you. If there is one thing I want you to carry out of this conversation today, it is this: the universe does not operate on your timeline, but that does not mean it is operating against you. And the moments that feel like the worst luck, the most painful timing, the most unfair interruptions to the life you were trying to build are often the moments where the most important and most necessary work is being done on your behalf, quietly and visibly, in ways you won't fully understand until you are standing somewhere better and looking back at where you were. The thing you walked away from, or the thing that walked away from you, was not a waste of your time. It was a necessary chapter. It was the part of the story that made the next part possible, and you were never going to find what was actually yours until you let go of what was never really yours to begin with. Timing isn't bad luck. It's protection. And sometimes the most protective thing the universe can do for you is take away the thing you were most convinced you needed. All right, that's where I'm going to leave it today. And if this hits something real for you, if you found yourself nodding along or thinking about a specific moment in your own life while you were watching this, then please give this video a like because it genuinely helps more people find it. And I think more people need to hear this, subscribe. If you want to be part of these conversations as I keep figuring all of this out in real time, take care of yourselves. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.